Recording in progress.
Hello, good evening. I'm Professor Sabina Dizdarevic, your current BNMS President, consultant in nuclear medicine at University Hospital Sussex NHS Foundation Trust and Brighton and Sussex Medical School. I'm delighted to welcome you to this final celebratory evening webinar with our past presidents. Thank you for joining us for this exceptional event, celebrating a story of scientific courage, technological ingenuity, and the remarkable individuals such as Professor Maisey, who pioneered and believed in nuclear medicine and PET long before the world recognized their potential. We will be also joined with another esteemed past president, Professor Richard Graham. This evening, our Honorary Secretary Dr. Eccles will also join us for discussion with our past presidents. She will also give a keynote talk, Evidence-Based Indications for PET-CT, Upcoming Uptake, what is new since 2022. We will explore the remarkable journey of nuclear medicine and PET from its earliest conceptual foundation to its transformation into the cornerstone of modern clinical practice. The audience will then have the opportunity to ask both past presidents and Dr. Eccles questions, whether related to their interviews or to their talks. Please post your questions in Q&A box. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, Siemens Healthineers and Novartis, for their support and collaboration. Let me begin by introducing Professor Michael Maisey. Professor Maisey qualified in medicine at Guy's Hospital in 1964 and after various house jobs became the endocrine registrar at Guy's in 1967 to 1969, where he had his first exposures to radioisotopes. Michael decided on career using radioisotopes and obtained a grant from a nuclear medicine training program at the Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore under Professor Henry Wagner. At the end of the second year, in 1972, he was the part of the first batch to take and pass the new American Board of Nuclear Medicine examinations. Fantastic achievement, and congratulations. On return to Guy's to nuclear medicine, the department was established, and in 1973, Professor Maisey was appointed the first nuclear medicine consultant. During the next 10 years, he then was firstly BNMS Secretary and then President. In 1991, he recognized the success of PET imaging research, and he recognized that it reached a point at which it could be used clinically. With the support of medical school and a planned merger of Guy's and St. Thomas's, Professor Michael then established the first UK clinical PET-CT with cyclotron and scanner at the St. Thomas's and another scanner on the Guy's side. He was a really prolific writer and researcher, academic, published and authored 13 books, 29 chapters and around 200 papers. Professor Michael retired in 2003, but he actually continued to be active in different areas, and we will talk about that in his interview. Hello, Michael. Lovely to see you tonight.
Hello. Nice to be here with you.
Thank you so much for just contributing to this celebration of the 60th anniversary. And I'm truly delighted to have you here in this celebratory event, and particularly would like to hear from you about your journey through nuclear medicine. I'm sure you can share a lot of stories. So what actually motivated you to choose nuclear medicine, and how did you end up in this field?
Well, as you said earlier, I did some thyroid work when I was a registrar, and we were just measuring the uptake in the thyroid, and then I used to have to connect all the measurements together and see something which looked a bit like a scan. That was interesting. And the other thing I did at the time was run an assay for long-acting thyroid stimulator, because I did my MD thesis on the basis of looking at what LATS, L-A-T-S, meant in thyrotoxicosis and children with thyroid disease.
That's amazing. That's how I entered nuclear medicine as well, through endocrine and thyroid. And and then like work to do it, guys. And I just really want to say my personal thanks to you for like recognizing my potential in a way. You were the first who basically pointed me for the first consultant job in the UK, and thank you for believing in me. Thank you for being so pioneering in nuclear medicine, but also really championing diversity and equality in medicine as well. So, and been there for all young generation and for those that really wanted to learn nuclear medicine, helping them through their journey. Thank you for your mentorship. So I just wanted to talk to you about your experience at John Hopkins, clearly working with Henry Wagner, who was considered the father of nuclear medicine in the USA. How was that?
It was a fantastic opportunity because at the time there was no real way in which you could learn any nuclear medicine in the UK in a formal sense. And they ran a full 2-year course of clinical nuclear medicine with lectures and so on radiopharmaceuticals and physics alongside it. So it was a fantastic experience, really, and one that would be difficult to get anywhere else at that time.
Yeah, and then I remember once you were mentioning about cardiac scans there, who were taking whole weekend for the computer to build the images. How was that experience?
Well, we were starting dynamic cardiac imaging, and we used to do it on a Friday and leave it with the computer to reassemble it for us to see on the Monday. And it took the whole time. The interesting thing looking back was that it made everybody say, well, actually, I don't think computers will have a very big role in either nuclear medicine or imaging in general.
Wow,
But, that was a bit wrong.
Definitely wrong. Many things we got wrong, is it? But one is certain, nuclear medicine is moving forward, and it's been like the best place ever so far. So, what was then also interesting that you recognized AI potential long time ago.
The potential, yes. I haven't done any work with
Yes,
AI.
yeah. But I mean, you were always saying that the potential of that should be like used. You did use also more augmented medicine, in artificial augmented intelligence with all quantifications for cardiac scans, and the was first one I'm sure in the UK who was also using a cardiac PET. Remember our sessions in a pre-transplant setting. So it was really, really rewarding experience. So looking back in the past, what were the main challenges while you were really going through your nuclear medicine journey, suddenly from really very exciting area, and then maybe some changes happened?
And I guess that the big problem was that nobody knew that nuclear medicine was going to be a real individual subject. It looked as though when we started, for example, it was run in the physics department by the physicists, and it didn't mean very much to anybody. So it actually, taking up nuclear medicine in the late 60s was quite a risky thing to do. And it just turned out to match the times between the 1960s when BNMS started and the time when I left was the time that practically all imaging took off. And it's just an amazing 50 odd years or thereabouts between then and now. It's just amazing time.
So how this evolved from a CT scanning, because at some point when there was a invited lecture on CT, what happened with the nuclear medicine? Can you tell us about that? Because I think you were there when it was all happening.
That was quite funny. If you remember, CT really started in the very early 70s, and I went to the American Nuclear Medicine Society meeting probably in about 1974 or thereabouts. And the main invited speaker was somebody coming in to talk about the potential for CT. And the depression amongst all the nuclear medicine people there who reckoned that CT was going to wipe out nuclear medicine completely was absolutely amazing to see. But I actually did disagree with them because, and I think it's turned out to be right, that CT and MRI to another extent enabled nuclear medicine to do what it does well, and that's look at function and physiology rather than anatomy. But it was quite a shocking thing to everybody at the time to be told that their specialty was just going to die.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine how it was that time, really a time of worries for nuclear medicine specialists. But I guess no one thought that we will sort of have a multimodality imaging developed at that time, that we could have a both function and anatomy together at the same time. I think you were already thinking about that to have it next to each other, or were you already thinking about potential of fusion of the images, although that probably would be really, really so far ahead?
Well, it was, but we were one of the first people to actually put CT and PET scanning together. We started off by us having to get a radiologist in to report the PET scans with us alongside the CT. And then we had a very strong physics group who were doing some remarkable work with CT and other images, merging them. And they merged our PET and CT scans together for reporting purposes. And that was a very exciting time. That was in the mid-90s.
Excellent. So can you just let us know how you introduced the clinical PET in the UK? Because I know that you actually really established the first scanner, and we celebrated that and marked that achievement in 2022 when we updated our PET-CT guidelines, which Amy will be talking about later on. So yeah, can you tell us about that experience, about introduction of the PET-CT, PET first, PET in the UK clinical area?
Well, the thing was that about 20 years before, PET had been set up as a research tool, and it was quite widely used as a research tool, but regarded by many as not applicable to clinical diagnostic medicine. And that's what we decided in about 1990, that the time had come to have it as a clinical service. So we went to the school and said we thought we ought to develop a PET center at Guy's and St Thomas's. And they said, yes, that's a good idea. You go away and raise a couple of £1 million and we can find some space for you. So that's what we did. And we managed to raise the money for it and installed it and did the scanning starting about 1992 or 3. And we got a lot of referrals from people in hospitals around that had to pay for the running costs as well as the cost we had to raise it. But it was a challenging and interesting time.
It's challenging, is it, even now for us to get the funding for new equipment? And so at that time, that fundraising, did you have anyone who was particularly helpful?
Well, we set up a committee, and we managed to get William Whitelaw, Lord Whitelaw, who was the Deputy Prime Minister to Margaret Thatcher, to chair it. And he was very influential and had a lot of fairly rich people he knew who helped out to raise the money. And in fact, little saying about William Whitelaw from Margaret Thatcher was that every Prime Minister should have a Willie.
Oh, should it? I'm not sure, but that's what she thought. Oh, so yeah. And then after that, you actually wrote the first clinical PET textbook as well, is it?
Yeah, we did. In the late 90s, I think we published something which was just basically clinical PET imaging rather than research, because it had been used for 20 years very, very interesting and important pieces of research, but it hadn't been used as a clinical diagnostic tool. And that's what made a big difference. And I think seeing what's happened next after that is just an amazing developments. So much so that when we had the 30th anniversary of the opening of ours, I went and gave a little talk about how we started it and could hardly understand what people were actually doing now because the technology had developed so much and the applications had become so widespread. It's really such an important development.
Yes, so absolutely. And thank you for this. And thank you for the vision. So I just want to ask you about since you retired, you also have some lot of things that you are doing. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Very quickly. When I first retired, the local hospital said, would you mind doing reporting some scans for us? And I didn't want to go down to another hospital and start reporting scans. So I set up a reporting imaging service for them for about a year. And then it developed into something rather bigger than that over the next 2 or 3 years. But eventually, everybody who had a PET scanner or a nuclear medicine service had people who were trained in it, which is what we've got now. The other thing I did was to take up wood turning, which I did for 20 years, raising money for freedom from torture, which used to be associated with amnesty, but it was mainly a medical service for torture victims who came to this country. And it's still very active. So I did that for about 20 years and raised quite a lot of money from wood turning for that.
Thank you, Michael. That's really, really brilliant. So thank you for all your work for medicine and for people outside of medicine and for all your help. So I'll come back to you after we talk to Richard. So I would like to introduce now Professor Richard Graham, who was also past president. And Richard is a really dear colleague, and he served as a past president from 21 to 23. Richard studied medicine at universities of Cambridge and Oxford. Not sure how you managed that, Richard. Nowadays is not allowed, just one of them. And trained in radiology in Oxford and was awarded at the Constance Thornton Fellowship in 2008 by ASIA to undertake visiting fellowship at Stanford University Medical Center, California. So another president who had a training in USA, Richard specializing in radionuclide and also musculoskeletal radiology, and he's very, very prominent figure nationally and internationally, also serving as a director of research and innovation in his own NHS trust, and he was previously their chief medical officer, responsible officer, and the trust deputy medical director. Richard is chair of the E&M Bone and Joint Committee and a member of E&M Advisory Council. So Richard is also chair of IRIFA Nuclear Medicine Guidelines, member of the clinical advisory team of Parathyroid UK, advisory board member of LEAP Digital Health Hub, and honorary professor at the University of Bath. So Richard was head of School of Radiology for HEE 7 Deanery and training program director before that. He was honorary secretary of the BNMS, also radionuclide advisor to RCR, Royal College of Radiologists, and UK delegate to the European Association of Nuclear Medicine previously. And he was also former member of radionuclide subcommittee of RCR, ASIA Clinical Radiology Specialty Training Board, and the NHSI and HEE Imaging Workforce Board. Very interesting about Richard, that Richard is also an officer in the Royal Naval Reserve, currently working in a role enabling medical reserves in NATO, and is a member of the scientific committee of the Inter-Allied Confederation of Medical Reserve Officers. Very interesting. Richard, you might share some experiences from that area as well. Richard was twice deployed to Afghanistan, and he was commanding officer of his local INR unit, HMS Flying Fox in Bristol, and former head of INR medical branch. Congratulations, Richard, on your fantastic biography and the journey, not just in nuclear medicine, then broader. So, coming back to nuclear medicine now. Hello, Richard.
Yeah, it makes me feel tired thinking of all the things I've done. But yeah.
I know, but yeah. I think, just thinking, where do you find the time? But I think, we're very keen to find out why nuclear medicine. Which aspect of nuclear medicine appealed to you most when deciding on the specialty?
I was a radiology trainee in Oxford, and a new consultant started on the same day as I started as a trainee, Kevin Bradley. So Kevin became a consultant on the same day as me, registrar. And Kevin was a really inspiring teacher in Oxford and spent a lot of time with the registrars. And one of our jobs was to cover nuclear medicine for the reporting of VQ scans. And we would be rotated to do that. And we would do that initially with some supervision, and then with very little supervision, they'd be checked the next day. And I suppose that was my first exposure. And I got to know Kevin, and also Fergus Gleeson, who was working closely with Kevin as PET-CT arrived in Oxford. And I was just inspired really with the opportunity. I felt we'd already got to the resolution of anatomy in radiology, and that the resolution wasn't going to improve significantly, that we're going to see structures we hadn't seen before. But what I thought would change was the ability to interrogate function, and I could see a real opportunity of having structure and function together in hybrid imaging, both PET-CT, SPECT-CT, and I felt that was something I wanted to be part of. And so really what inspired me was that, and great teachers, both Kevin and Fergus were brilliant teachers, taught me a lot. And I saw other people in other subspecialties really just not being taught very much and not being inspired, and I didn't want to be like that. So that's why I chose nuke med.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, nuclear medicine, I think is special in a way. I think that a lot of people that are in nuclear medicine are devoted to teaching. And nowadays, I think we really need to find more time to spend with our own registrars, particularly after COVID. I think because a lot of work is done off-site nowadays with reporting potential from home working. And so I think we always need to think about that as well. So you obviously were very active in HEE as well in education.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. So I think I have taken an attitude of pay it forward. I was very well taught as a registrar. I had a wonderful educational experience over those 6 years, and I wanted to recreate that for another generation. So that's why I kind of ended up being a TPD and then subsequently head of school. But also another thing I remember fondly was, the inter-registrar teaching. So there was a real tradition of, the more senior registrars teaching the junior registrars. And I felt that really developed kind of teamwork and bonding in the team. And another person who was pretty inspirational was Andy Scarsbrook. So he was a couple of years above me in our training scheme. Andy taught me a lot too. And also Famid Chowdhury, who works in Leeds too. Famid was the year above me. He was a fellow the year above me. He was also great fun and, taught me lots. And I think a lot of peer teaching is really important. So we need to create the environment where people are teaching one another and that, education kind of prevails. And I think you're right. We need face time with our trainees to inspire the next generation.
Excellent. And what inspired you to take on the role of the BNMS president then?
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So, I mean, that all happened by accident, but essentially I wrote to Brian Neely when he was president, and I can't even remember what I wrote to him about some issue in nuclear medicine that I think I felt needed improving, but I can't remember what the issue was. And he wrote back to me and said, well, why don't you join the Professional Standards Committee? So it must have been something about how we do a certain test. I can't remember what it was. So I joined the PSC of the BNMS, and I just really enjoyed it. I loved the multi-professional nature, the kind of inclusive culture and atmosphere, and that got me interested in the BNMS, I think. And then I stood for council when a seat came up eventually. I did that. and then one day, I can't remember who it was, but yeah, Sarah Allen, and maybe it was Brian, like cornered me and said, I think you'd be really good to be the secretary. And I was like, really? I mean, I hadn't even considered, I hadn't really thought about it. And so eventually I became the secretary of the BNMS. And then I just, kept going from there. And once I'd been the secretary, I could see the opportunity, of being president would be fun. I stood first time against John Buscombe, who beat me. I mean, I haven't spoken to him since. But I felt, it was great, and that was, great competition. And John was a brilliant president, and so I'm glad he won. And I learned a lot from him. And there were big shoes to fill when I took over from John after I stood again. So I found the culture really great, and just the opportunity we have, because the government listened to us, funding bodies listen to us, industry is a constituent stakeholder in us, and ultimately we're here for the patients so they get the best nuclear medicine healthcare, both diagnostically and therapeutically. We're setting standards, we're driving the specialty forward, and I think what's great is anyone can get involved. In some clinical societies, can feel a bit elitist and difficult to make your kind of way, but I think anyone can be involved in the BNMS, and I think that's a wonderful thing. And the strength of the wisdom of crowds, right? Having lots of different viewpoints, diversity in profession, in background, in nationality, all of that leads to the strength of the BNMS.
Definitely, as a family feel, is it, as you said once?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And but I think some organizations, have quotas and things to work at diversity. We've never needed to do that in the BNMS, which I think, speaks volumes.
Yes.
Because there are other organizations I've been involved in where things are heavily quoted. And, whilst that can be good for, changing things, it leads to other problems as well. Whereas we've never needed to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, clearly during your presidency, there were a lot of different things happening as well. And what were the main key challenges? Because you were telling us what is really great, how we can impact on patients' outcome and feeling really connected. So, but there were some challenges, I'm sure.
There were, I mean, many challenges. I guess one challenge that I've been working on for a long time with John Buscombe as well was bringing nuclear medicine and radiology closer together. There was a time when there was a bit of a schism between the two specialties, and that wasn't very healthy. And we needed to do bridge building, mutual understanding. So that was something I worked on. In a way, the disbanding of the radionuclide committee, the RCR, in a way signified that bringing the specialty closer together, and really the BNMS becoming essentially a SIG to the RCR from the point of view advising them about radionuclide, radiology, nuclear medicine. So that I felt that was an achievement, without to avoid unnecessary duplication. And we've had many senior people from the RCR come to our meeting. We've got Stephen Harden coming this year to Manchester, which I think speaks volumes about the relationship that we have. And that's not to say we've been subsumed by radiology, but I think there's mutual respect in both directions. And I happen to be a radiologist, but that's not it's irrelevant what my background is. So I think so that's something I feel proud of. I was also involved in all of the kind of politics around Brexit, and I was at a BNMS council meeting, and I was rung up by Newsnight to say, would I come on the show? And they'd rung me up a few weeks ago when I was at home in Bath and said, could I come on the show tonight? They would do it from a remote studio in Bristol. And I said, oh, yeah, sure, they'll send a car. And I thought, I'll come on. And then what happened was they got Matt Hancock, and they said, we're going to have to bump you for Matt Hancock, but could you give us 3 questions to ask Matt Hancock? And so I can't remember all the questions, but one of them was I asked, asked Matt Hancock how he would assure radiopharmaceutical and medical device supply in a no-deal Brexit. Okay. And I asked 2 other questions. Anyway, so they get Matt Hancock on, and Kirsty Walk goes, well, Richard Graham from the BNMS says, what do you say? And his non-verbals were like, bring me his entrails, essentially. Obviously he couldn't answer my questions. But I didn't know that I was going to be name checked, which gave me some political problems with the comms department, and his comms department had to go at my comms department for letting me give those questions and so forth. But I just water off a duck's back. So then a few weeks later, I went on Newsnight, and they said, you can either go on the show tonight, or we'll do a piece to camera outside Broadcasting House. And so I trundled down we were meeting at a friend's house for the BNMS Council. So I went down to Broadcasting House, and they interviewed me. And one of the questions they asked me was, will cancer care in the UK be harmed by no-deal Brexit? And I said, well, it's already being harmed because we're having to plan as if there's going to be a no-deal Brexit. So we're de-enriching our clinics, and we're having to plan for it. Anyway, that then made a headlines the next day, and the RCR, because I think at that point I was RCR radionuclide advisor. I don't think I wasn't BNMS president then, and so the RCR got, I think, 850 news stories on the back of that, and a bit of a furore. And I was sort of soundbited on all the Today program and all of that, and Matt Hancock was upset with me.
Wow.
I feel I've been more victorious given subsequent suggestions.
Yeah, I think you've done very well there. At least you definitely acknowledged, the influence and impact of no deal Brexit, and particularly on areas as ours, no radiopharmaceuticals, and which we actually experiencing even now. Sometimes you might think, is it just because of this or different things? Because there are always some sort of combined reasons, is it? But well done for that. And asking question, I think it was probably something as a wake-up call. Oh, what radiopharmaceuticals?
Yeah, well, I think the problem is most of our politicians have got arts degrees rather than science degrees.
Yes.
And so the concept of half-life was a bit of a problem for them. And so they didn't understand that we couldn't stockpile radiopharmaceuticals and understand the importance of them in the cancer, both diagnostic and therapeutic pathways. I also spoke to other people advising the government during Brexit and knowing COVID, and people told me that politicians didn't understand exponentials terribly well, which shows how Boris didn't lock down very quickly because he didn't understand the implications of the delay and what that meant. And it's back to, I feel we need more politicians with science degrees rather than just PPE.
Okay, so that would be solution for the future. Okay, so coming back to your most memorable moment of your term, so anything that you would like to mention?
Well, I think my probably most memorable thing is John Buscombe arriving at my house with the robes of office.
Oh yes.
Yeah, because it was during Brexit, and there were lots of rules about that how we're going to do the handover, and so yeah, John drove all the way to my house, which I live just outside Bath, in a socially distanced way, to hand me over the esteemed robes of office, which I then had to sort of put on in the virtual ceremony online because we couldn't do it face to face. Yeah, and so that was quite funny. And those robes have got a funny story. They're from some work that was done with the UN, aren't they? And they were given from Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was quite funny. No, I remember also just the increased attendance at our BNMS conferences. We did a lot of work drumming up sponsorship, getting the program really good, and just year on year it's continued. If we go back 10 years, every year we've had more people, better feedback, and it gets better and better and better, which I'm proud to have been a part of that, but that continues. And the interest of the ENM has seen a similar trajectory in their attendance and programming and so forth. So it's a great time to be in nuclear medicine. It's a really kind of halcyon days. I think getting PSMA commissioned by NHS England, that I was involved in that. That was very kind of circuitous. Ultimately, it was sort of semi-commissioned, and they were very reluctant to just open the floodgates. But again, what a great tracer the impact is having in prostate cancer, and that is firmly available in the UK. But clearly, there are other tracers coming down the tracks. One of my greatest failures, which you've been in an email conversation with me this week, is about not getting fluorocholine commissioned for parathyroid adenoma. it's not a large volume indication, but it's really useful.
Absolutely.
And today I did the endocrine MDT. We've got a patient who have already done sestamibion, they've had ultrasounds, they've had a 4D-CT, they've had a radical neck exploration. We still haven't found their parathyroid adenoma, and they need fluorocholine, but I'm not allowed to do the scan because it's not commissioned. I mean, in the old days, when it was commissioned for prostate cancer, you could maybe, sneak it under the wire. If it was a male patient, no one would notice. But now,
Yeah, depends who is looking, Richard. I think that there are different departments doing different things, but obviously we do need to get it commissioned, and I think it's definitely continuing to be on our agenda. And Amy and I have another plan to try to approach from different angles. So let's hope that we can break this wall. And I just want to say that I think your cat appeared at that ceremony.
Oh yeah, my cat. That is true. My cat did jump on me, didn't it?
Yes,
when I was doing my closing address. Yeah,
yes.
I mean, they must have been around feeding time.
Yeah,
and it gets very affectionate.
Yeah, that was really good one. So now I'll just invite our Honorary Secretary, Dr. Amy Eccles, who is a consultant radiologist at Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust in London. She is also radionuclide radiology advisor for the Royal College of Radiologists and chair of the Intercollegiate Standing Committee in Nuclear Medicine. Amy completed her medical degree at the University of Cambridge and subsequently specialized in radiology with subspecialist interest in nuclear medicine at Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust. Her research interests include the development of molecular radiotherapy and associated imaging, and she is passionate about increasing the accessibility of nuclear medicine imaging and therapeutic techniques to more patients across the UK. So Amy is going to give a talk on evidence-based indications for PET-CT, upcoming update, what's new since 2022. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Sabina, and thank you, everybody, for the warm introduction. It's a tough act to follow with two past presidents, but this will be a quick run-through of the 2022 indications for PET-CT between the Royal College of Radiologists and Royal College of Physicians, and what we're doing to update these in 2026. So the background of the evidence-based indications for the use of PET-CT, we've heard from Professor Michael Maisey about the initiation of clinical PET in the late 90s, and that subsequently led to several documents on the strategy for provision of PET-CT or PET in the UK, and in 2025 a strategy for the development and integration of leading-edge technology within routine clinical practice. And then in 2012, the first edition of the evidence-based indications for the use of PET-CT in the United Kingdom were drawn up, and that was authored by Professor Sally Barrington and Professor Andy Scarsbrook, who again we've heard about today with the inspiring of Prof Graham, and that was supported at the time by the Intercollegiate Standing Committee and was used to support the development of commissioning of PET-CT within the NHS. There have been subsequent editions in 2013 and then in 2016, and it was in 2022 that we are now in our current guidelines. The aim of these indications was always to provide an updated summary of relevant indications for the use of PET-CT where there is good evidence that patients will benefit from improved disease assessment, resulting in altered management and improved outcomes. So these are around the evidence for clinical indications rather than the commissioned indications as approved by NHS. It's not always exhaustive, so there will be local indications where PET-CT may be used at the discretion of local administration of the RSAT license holder, and it's generally seen for those indications to be a problem-solving tool when other imaging modalities have been inconclusive or when there will be a significant change in management. So as I said, in 2022, the fourth edition came out. This was led by Professor Sabina Dizdarevic, who was the chair of the Intercollegiate Standing Committee at that time. And it had more contributions from experts across the UK. So not just nuclear medicine physicians, not just radiologists, but our clinical colleagues as well. So we've had input from oncologists, paediatricians, rheumatologists, infectious diseases, cardiologists, etc. 2022 The current contents you can see here on the right hand side of the screen. There are multiple indications. We've tried to split it at that time into the FDG indications for both oncology and non-oncology, as well as the non-F18 FDG tracers. So thinking about choline for prostate cancer, PSMA at that time, choline for parathyroid adenomas, DOTA imaging and DOPA imaging for some of our neuroendocrine tumours, insulinomas, etc., as well as the cardiac tracers, thinking about rubidium, ammonia, and the amyloid tracers in neurodegenerative conditions. We then have also a separate section for paediatric imaging, so again split into oncological and non-oncological topics. So that leads me on to the 2026 edition, and I've just taken a deep breath because I've realised quite how much work I've let myself in for. But again, I'm going to rely on the contributions from multiple experts from across the UK, and thank you so much to all of you who have volunteered already. We're going to continue to provide ongoing up-to-date evidence to support the PET-CT commissioning across the UK, but particularly also highlighting those clinical indications where the evidence is strong that PET-CT and PET-MRI will benefit our patients. You can see again from this schematic that back in the day, the first edition was around 20 pages, including references. The fourth edition was around 86 pages. So I think we're going to top out at over 100 pages for this 2026 edition. We're going to keep the topics relatively straightforward and relatively the same. So again, we'll split it into adults and pediatrics. We'll split it into oncology and non-oncology, and we will have the sections for non-FDG tracers. But as we all know, there's going to be expanding existing fields for the current indications. We're also going to look at the large axial field of view. We can now potentially do PET-CT in pregnancy, and there are new tracers coming online. So again, as Prof Graham talked about, there are some new tracers, not just the choline for parathyroid, but flurpiridaz maybe for the cardiac indications. FAPI we have all been talking about for a long time, and it is going to have indications, we think, within our clinical practice, and also thinking about complementary tau to our amyloid imaging as well. So thinking about the timeline, we've got our volunteers. We're in the process of assigning topics this week, although I have to say my brain is slightly full with BNMS Spring Meeting for Manchester. But we'd like to think that we can get the first draft together by the end of June, and we'd like this to be published by the end of 2026, marking the end of the 60th year of the British Nuclear Medicine Society. So in conclusion, the evidence-based indications will continue to provide the nuclear medicine imaging and clinical community with up-to-date information regarding the use of PET-CT imaging within clinical practice. It's there to support and guide appropriate commissioning of PET-CT services to increase equitable access and improving patient outcomes across the UK. So many thanks for listening to my brief talk. Hopefully that gives us all time for some questions, both back to Professor Maisey and to Professor Graham, as well as to Sabina, our current president as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. That was brilliant. Just what we wanted to say in a way that we will keep updating our guidelines. Even though they might not be commissioned by the NHS, it's really, really important that we publish them because actually they then do have evidence that they need to commission for. And this year they did refer to guidelines in a way that they said, unfortunately, we don't have funding for them, but we acknowledge that is there. And once, if it's not written, they would never even think about that. So great work that we are planning to mark our 60th anniversary with the end of the year with the publishing 26 guidelines. And I know that you already have a team of the people who contributed previously, but now we have a question from the audience. I guess could be for you, but could be for our past presidents. What non-PET test that we do now do you think have a future? So maybe Amy first, because it was your talk, and then we'll have maybe Richard and Michael if they want to contribute. Yeah.
Well, I think just as Prof Maisey talked about, the advent of CT was going to kill nuclear medicine. I think PET has definitely, sort of exponentially grown, but it hasn't completely replaced nuclear medicine. And I think particularly some of the other functional tracers for maybe some of the rarer tumours. So MIBG still has a role, particularly in therapeutic selection of patients, not one size fits all. But I'd also suggest that maybe some of the bone scans and even the cardiacs, they all have their role. And PET is not going to be for everyone, but as the number of PET tracers increases, potentially the number of nuclear medicine tracers and SPECT tracers doesn't seem to be increasing at quite the same rate. But I still think there will be a role for a long time to come. I'm not thinking it's going to be over too soon.
Yeah, and I think technology advances really predated radiopharmaceutical advances with PET a lot, and I think currently we are getting technological advances in SPECT-CT. What do you think about that, Richard?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I'm a big advocate of 360 CZT SPECT-CT. So we have one in Bath with the Veriton. There's obviously the Star Guide by GE, both broadly equivalent, do the same sort of job. And you get much better resolution, better image quality. You can certainly do, we can do a half body acquisition in probably just over 10 minutes, which is really useful. So we don't do any planar imaging in Bath anymore. Everything is SPECT acquired. And that gives you more certainty. I was reporting a bone scan this very day where, if I just looked at the MIP, I'd have thought it's probably metastatic disease. I looked, closely at our whole body SPECT-CT and, it was all degenerative, and I could have been caught out. And, it increases your certainty. I think the other thing I think will happen is that many PET tracers, for instance, what's the future of technetium PSMA, for instance, on a 360 CZT system? Maybe that will be very cost effective. Who knows? So I think the price will come down of the 360 CZT systems, and that will give another lease of life to standard SPECT tracers, but also tracers used in PET we might find actually could be equally well delivered or more cost effectively delivered in SPECT. Who knows? I don't know the answer to that, but it's all, I do know that the radiopharmaceutical companies are looking at all of these angles. I don't think it's the end of the road at all for SPECT and SPECT-CT, but clearly PET-CT has been growing 15 to 20% compound per annum, and people are the users of it, which are the clinicians love the extra information it gives, the treatment response assessments, the better staging quality, and ultimately the reason they refer the patients is because the patients do better. They either operate on the right patients, give the right treatment regimen, which leads to more and more personalized cancer care, which is kind of the holy grail, and we're a big enabler of that.
Yeah, I absolutely still have other tracers that as a renal imaging is still very live, and CCAT is really fantastic test as well. So I mean, not just technology, we have CCAT developed. In last several decades, GFI is there definitely to stay. So I think I don't see that that actually the PET will take over completely. But we still have a good old nuclear medicine and also therapy development. We will need to image probably post-treatment response in a way using just maybe gamma cameras rather than PET. Once when we start doing dosimetry, not for all treatments, but definitely. So we have more questions. This is now for Edith Gallagher. A wonderful conversation, great talk for Professor Graham. If you no longer do planar whole body bone scans, many research trials are still having them as a part of their protocol. Is this a problem to facilitate this at your center?
Yeah. So in short, no. I mean, we also have a double-headed SPECT-CT, traditional one, and for the research trials, make exceptions. We do some planar bone scans for those, but I would encourage people writing trial protocols to start, getting into the SPECT era. But clearly, they need a large number of sites that can do that. The technology is not across everywhere, so I think both are fine. But And the other thing you see often in research trials now is an F18 bone scan is accepted as well. You know, there's normally interchangeable bone assessment. So the sponsors are fairly flexible.
Yeah. So coming back to like advice for the next generation of professionals entering the field today, I think I want to ask Professor Maisey about that. What do you think? What would you tell them?
Well, it's certainly very different to in the late 60s, early 70s, because at that time nobody knew that there was going to be a profession in which you could actually go into nuclear medicine, and there was a real possibility that it didn't develop or didn't exist at that time. We didn't know. So it's amazing to hear it, and it's amazing to hear people talking about the things you're doing with PET-CT, because we were under a considerable pressure at the time not to make it a clinical possibility. We just felt that there was enough clinical activity and clinical importance in PET-CT. And now hearing what you're doing now and all the possibilities, it's just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Very, very, very impressive.
It's truly non-stoppable, is it? PET got non-stoppable. So
and at the time, there wasn't much talk about costs. About the time we introduced PET-CT, I think it was about the time that NICE was set up, very approximately, I think. And it's quite interesting to hear talking about, you know, the cost effectiveness of the different imaging. It started with obviously other things, but with imaging, it's taken rather longer, I think. It's interesting.
Thank you, Michael. I think, yeah, it's good time to be in nuclear medicine, certainly. So although we might feel that NHS is not commissioning everything what we would like to be commissioned and what there is evidence for, but actually there was a really fantastic journey and very successful journey in the last 30 years. We now have again question from Mark Hodnett. How do you envisage PET converging with other imaging modalities?
Who are you asking, Sabina?
Maybe you, Richard?
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, PET-MR hasn't really been a resounding success. I think we would all agree. You know, it's a fairly niche kind of construction, because the compromises you have to put on the MR mean you don't have a state-of-the-art MR, and also unless you're in a moving structure, post-processed fusion works pretty well between MR and PET-CT. So, you know, I don't really see PET-MR being a major development. I think PET-CT, I mean, clearly has developed, you know, into the long field of view. I mean, I guess the next evolution might be photon counting CT with PET, when photon counting CT becomes the standard CT that we all use. I can see that happening. I don't really see PET and ultrasound having a sort of marriage made in heaven, really. They're not like surf and turf, I don't think. No, I mean, I think it's going to not go beyond. I think PET-CT is where we're at, but I think we will see, you know, the CT component definitely improving in PET-CT. I think also, I mean, there's been such a rapid evolution in PET-CT technology in the last even 3 years. You know, someone who bought a PET-CT 4 years ago is sitting on something that's, you know, reasonably obsolete, I would say. I haven't seen that speed of evolution in any imaging modality in my career as a radiologist, I don't think, over quite such a short time frame. So I think there's been massive advances. So, you know, the intermediate length field of view, the kind of 40 to 60 centimeter PET, is now, you know, available and a clinical reality. And I think, you know, if you can afford it, I think that's what I'm hoping we will buy as our next PET-CT, because I think it offers genuine sensitivity advantages. And actually, you know, the limitation of numbers of scans per hour will be getting the patients on and off the bed, not your length of field of view. So, you know, whole body, great for certain applications, for, you know, research and so forth. But in real clinical practice, I wonder whether something around 50 centimeters is where we'll ultimately settle, and that will become the standard PET-CT. You know, we go, you know, 10, 15 years hence, I wonder if that will be the field of view. So But I think it's amazing just how PET-CT has rapidly evolved in the last couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you for your answer, Richard. So now we're getting closer to the end. So I just want to ask final questions. Like as we celebrate 60th years of the BNMS, what is your vision for the future, for the next decade, Amy, just briefly?
So I see continuing what we're doing, so growing on the multidisciplinary and the multi-professional aspects of the British Nuclear Medicine Society, and keeping us as like a close-knit family, as we've talked about, but also with that influence, so we can help the artists in the in the government understand what we do in a way that will benefit patients. And also benefit the NHS. So if we can do something cost effectively, if we can do a contrast enhanced PET, or if we can do photon enhanced PET-CT, which then means the patient doesn't need another scan, then we can keep the numbers of scans down, benefiting the patients, keeping the costs down overall. I also see the roles increasing. So again, multi-professional roles within the delivery of both diagnostic and therapeutic nuclear medicine, and supporting things so that our service is not so reliant on such a fragile delivery system as we've just talked about, that we've maybe got a little bit more sovereignty for the generation of radiopharmaceuticals on UK soil as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Amy. And Michael, any message or final reflection that you like to share with the BNMS community?
Oh, I think it's just amazing how it's developed from such a small thing, and the CT, PET-CT particularly is just remarkable. There's been no mention this evening of AI. It's one of the things that's going to make a big difference probably to all imaging, and I think it will have some effect in nuclear medicine, but I'm not sufficiently up to date to know how much, but I think it'd be surprising if it doesn't have some.
Absolutely, I think on all of us. I was told once, like AI's, people are not going to be replaced by AI, but people who don't use AI will be. So I think we will be all using it. Otherwise, it's unstoppable in a way. So, but we just need to make sure that we know how to best use it. So finally, from me, I just want to say that all roads now lead to Manchester, and please join us in Manchester. Share our passion for nuclear medicine, our commitments to patients. Our patients, really, they are in our first, really, in our hearts, and that we put them at our hearts, and everything what we do is really for the patient's outcomes. Please, safe journey to Manchester, but join us for a fantastic scientific program, but also for fantastic, even really more entertaining, probably social events. Join me for President Reception on 20th April at 6 p.m. And before that, if you're arriving earlier on Sunday, join us for Members Reception 6 p.m. as well in Manchester Hall. So safe journey to Manchester, and thank you today for really wonderful talks and wonderful discussions, your real experience, and I just really had a beautiful time, I need to say, and it was so lovely to see you, Michael, after all these years. I mean, just even it is like not face to face, but I'm looking forward to see you face to face in Manchester. And of course, two of you, and Dom, who is behind the scene, but without him, we wouldn't be able to do this. And just see you then, next Sunday, next week. And finally, we are getting closer to our 60th celebratory annual meeting. Thank you all for joining us for Past Presidents webinars. Bye for now.
Bye.